Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Elestals video for you. Today we're going to be reviewing Moonrise. I'm going to be going through every card in the set, both new cards and reprints, and I'm going to be giving them star ratings out of 5. So the reason that I'm covering the reprints as well as the new cards is that some of these reprints are because cards have new Ascension forms or, it's mostly just that, right? But also I want to make sure that we are discussing these cards in the context of the new set. So I'll also be going over stuff that's already been released, like, Drakid and Drakking and those, sort of preview lunar cards. Going to be talking about them again, or I guess for the first time, but talking about them even though they're already out, because I do want to discuss them in the context of a post-Moonrise game. So that said, like I said, I'm going to do a 5-star rating system, and let's actually switch over to here, and I'll show you what this kind of rating system is all about. So, taking a look at the little infographic I have on screen here. So this is basically how I determine how many stars a card gets. If a card gets 5 stars, I anticipate that the card is either a staple or will have high impact in multiple, or at least a very, very, upper tiered meta deck. Like, this card will basically see play in a tier 1 or at the very least an upper tier 2 deck if it's not a staple. For 4-star cards, I believe that these are cards that will see a fair bit of tournament success and play, but not necessarily be like the best of the best, right? I think pretty self-explanatory there. 3-star cards, I think, are very solid, that will see a fair bit of play and might be more optional stuff in more meta decks if they see play in that, but overall still solid picks for tournaments. A deck centered around a 3-star card, I think, could still very easily go like 4-0 at a webcam weekly or something like that, right? 2-star cards are cards that I anticipate people will try out initially, but will ultimately fall off and ultimately prove to be not as good as some of the other things in the set. And if I give a card 1 star, that means I think this card is unplayably bad. I don't expect it to have any real major impact, in the metagame. So wanted to make sure we just had our bases covered, so you know kind of what I mean when I am assigning these ratings to each of these cards here. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got to say about it. So why don't we just go ahead and start taking a look at some of these star ratings. Okay, let's start getting into these star ratings. I'm not going to read each card's effect as I'm rating them. If you want to read what the card does, if you're not familiar, feel free to pause on the screen and take a look for yourself. I'm going to try to give brief, concise explanations for my star ratings, and we'll try to move through this as efficiently as possible. Starting off with Nabi, I'm going to give Nabi 4 stars. I think that just about any Lunar dedicated deck should be considering playing at least 2, if not 3 Nabi, because of its ability to definitely swing board states in your favor, right? Because Nabi gives each Elestral that's not Solar or Lunar Enchanted -2, that can very easily potentially let you run over, again, an entire board state, right? I think of this a lot in terms of like Eddie, where it's got the same stat line and helps you win battles. Now, this doesn't help you win battles against defense mode stuff, but I do still think that, again, being able to affect multiple Elestrals off the first effect does make Nabi worthwhile for a decent amount of Lunar decks. As far as the second effect goes, I wouldn't expect to resolve that quite as often. But the first effect, I think, is definitely worth going for. Speaking of the second effect and the Doppelganger, I'm going to go into this next, and I'll give it a 3 stars. So, I know that MBT said that, if Doppelganger has any amount of text on it, it'll be playable. And I think people will definitely experiment going Nabi into Doppelganger in Lunar decks. But I don't know that I would play Doppelganger in every single deck I would play Nabi in, mostly because I think 5/4 is a little bit low for a 2-spirit, and the first effect, while essentially giving everything -2 attack, except for Lunar and Solar, of course, is like fine. I don't think it always makes up for how low statted this body is, It's pretty easy to turn it into defense mode and run over, even if it is, giving another card, -2 attack, especially another 2-spirit, right? So, The third effect, or the second effect rather, into the third form, I don't think is really very relevant. It's very, very specific, so that's another reason why I'm only giving it 3 stars. And speaking of the third form, the Fulgurix here, this one I'm going to give 2 stars. So as far as 3 spirits go, I think that you could have better payoff than this. Of course, at 2 stars, I do still think people will try this. I think that's true of pretty much almost every 3-spirit Elestral, that at some point somebody will, or not somebody, but enough people will dedicatedly like try the card. And I don't think Fulgurix is bad. I just, like I was about to allude to, I just don't think it does quite enough for a 3-spirit, right? It can Nexus, which is okay. The first effect is like, it's pretty good, you know, it's fine. But the third effect is like kind of your big payoff, and you know, putting a card on bottom of the deck for receiving a Nexus Spirit is like, it's fine. But again, for a 3-spirit, is that really, you know, what you want to go out of your way so far to go into? I'm not personally super duper convinced, but I could be wrong about that. Fawnlet. I'm going to give Fawnlet 4 stars. I'm very optimistic about this card. So I think you absolutely play this in a Posthumous deck, or, you know, the dedicated Artemis deck there, whatever you want to call it. And I think in a world where Elechik goes to 1, you definitely look to play this in other decks that are playing Artemis that are more splashing Lunar or not like quite as dedicated Lunar. Now, granted, Elechik being a 4/1, I think is still better than this body. The defense buff effect is like, it's fine, but I wouldn't really like count on that. Like, I wouldn't really run out in Artemis with 3 or 4 spirits in addition to this in defense mode on turn 1. I'd probably just play this in attack and just keep the Artemis in my hand for our next turn. But I still think this card is quite good, and the ability to search the Theraheart if you already have the Artemis, I think is also quite good. Speaking of Theraheart, we're going to go into that one next here. This one I'm going to give 3 stars. Not going to always give the second form 1 star lower than the first form. But in this case, I think the Theraheart it's an interesting card, right? So the effect is pretty decent if you're able to pull it off, right? Negating a counter rune is already pretty big, and then getting to special ascend into a very good card of Posthumous is also quite nice. That said, I don't know. The thing is, like, you can't really special send this from your Fawnlet, and a 6/4 body, I think it's fine for 2 spirits, but also not, like, super outstanding. I'm a little less sure about, like, how often this card gets played, especially being searchable by Fawnlet. I kind of struggle to see a world where you really need more than 1 copy of this card, but I still think it'll be decent. And the Posthumous. So, I really thought about this. I'm going to give this card 4 stars, but I really did almost give it 5, because I think that the Posthumous is going to be one of, if not the best, one of the better, if not the best, dedicated Lunar decks. When I look at Posthumous, I think a lot of Volt Tempest, which is currently, I would consider that a tier 2 deck right now. And the Posthumous like reads pretty favorably compared to the Volt Tempest, right? Rather than burning an opponent and being immune to, oh gosh, what is it? Is it Elestals or Invoke effects? I actually can't remember. I think it's Elestrals, but I think that destroying the cards that are being suppressed is better than doing burn, and being unaffected by counter runes is huge, especially for a nicely setted 3-spirit, right? I can tell you from experience playing Wasp Ivy that effect is very, very powerful. So I almost gave this 5 stars because I really do think, again, that the Posthumous deck will have some legs, but I'm going to hedge and I'll give it 4 stars for now. All right, moving into our next card, that's going to be Voldusk here. So Voldusk is going to be, you know, more contingent on the Lunar Spirits of how good it is. That said, I will give this 4 stars. I think that the Lunar Phase deck will be decent, if not good, and Voldusk is definitely key to that Lunar Phase deck. Being able to draw a card or return a spirit is very, very nice. You'll pretty much always, I imagine, draw a card unless it's like getting later into the game and you really need that Lunar back. And of course, being a 5, having that 5 defense means that it is very likely to stick around on the board. A very, very good card for the Lunar Phase deck, like I said, which I do anticipate will be probably upper rogue, maybe tier 2, but yeah, definitely a very good card in that deck there. For the Volumbra, this one I'm only going to give 2 stars. I mean, it's clearly here to just bridge the Voldusk into the Volclipse, right? The 5/7 body is still, like, fine, and there might be a world where you play Volumbra without Volclipse, but at the same time, I'm, like, kind of struggling to see that, because not only do you have to discard a Lunar Phase, you also have to have this in hand. And at that point, you really could just like wait a turn and ascend it regularly, right? Speaking of the Volclips, I'm only going to give this 2 stars because I know people are going to try this out, but I'm going to level with you. I kind of think this is a 1-star card. The payoff for shuffling the 8 different lunar phases is so much setup for something that I really don't think is worth it. Like, imagine this scenario. You have the 8 lunar phases in your deck, and your opponent has 2 set face-down runes and a 1 Spirit Elestral, right? You activate the Volclips effect and then bounce their board back, swing in for 3, and then on their turn, they can just kind of set the spirits or the runes again, and then just summon their Elestral again. It's like that. The amount of payoff or setup rather to get the lunar phases into the graveyard, the underworld, is just not worth the payoff. I really don't think it is. And the first effect is really not compelling enough for this card to make me want to try it either. If I want a big body on a 3 spirit, I can just play like Penterra or like even like Magia Ursa, right? Or something like that, which is always a 12/12. I really don't think this card is it, but I know people are going to want to try to get off the second effect, so that's why I'm putting it at 2 stars for now. Alright, so for our next card, we have Gloombat. Gloombat I'm pretty up on. I'll give it 4 stars, even though this card currently doesn't see a lot of play. It is legal, but I think Gloombat is going to be one of the major disincentives to be setting multiple runes. And the Gloombat also plays really, really well with some other cards that we're going to see here, particularly the Lunar Phase Full Moon. I know we haven't covered it yet, but I'll very briefly talk about the Lunar Phase Full Moon here, right? Because imagine this scenario. Imagine you're holding Gloombat, Lunar Phase Full Moon, and, you know, any 3-spirit Lunar Elestral. Ideally, probably Posthumous, but you can special cast the Gloombat, right? Then you can use the full moon to put 2 more lunar on it. You can disenchant one of those, because that is a total of 3, so disenchant down to 2, to pop one of the 2 face down runes, and then you can just ascend into your 3 spirit. I think that's going to be quite good. I think that just in general, again, this card representing such a threat to face down runes is quite good. If lunar decks don't main deck this card, I think you do side deck it, and especially against, you know, decks that tend to be a little more back row heavy. It's only face down, so of course that doesn't count like Stadiums and Divines, but there are some decks that play more counters than others. I'm optimistic about this card. Again, I think the major reason it hasn't seen more play up until now is that there's not, you know, a very dedicated lunar deck, but I think this could very easily slot into it or get into a dedicated Ascend lunar strategy. So the Ascended form of the Gloombat is going to be the Phasmacore. This one, I'm going to give 2 stars. So the thing about this Phasmacore is that a recurring 8/1 is certainly a very interesting prospect, but the problem, there's a few problems with it. I have a couple of major problems with it. The first one is that it's really expensive, right? Like, you have to expend 1, and then you also, of course, have to re-enchant 2 new lunar spirits onto the Phasmacore. So like, if you're doing that every turn in addition to like taking damage and playing other cards, that's going to add up really, really quickly. The other thing I kind of don't like about the Phasmacore is that you're just incredibly sad if this gets bounced by like a Shield of Achilles or you know, something else. And the other thing too is that like, for a card that recurs itself, it doesn't really stop you from losing like on the spot. Like, you know, obviously it'd be a lot more powerful if it just brought itself back right away. That'd probably be a little bit too good. But, you know, if your opponent has like 2 dudes in play already and they go, Eddie, I know I'm throwing out a lot of hypotheticals for a lot of these cards here. I guess I'll try to avoid doing that as much, but I'm just trying to paint scenarios that like illustrate what I'm thinking about when I read these cards, right? Like, this card doesn't stop you from like losing the game on the spot is basically what I'm getting at. So, I don't think this card will pan out, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Next up, we have Hypnopossum, and Hypnopossum is going to be our first 1-star card. If this card had actual stats and wasn't a 1/1, I'd be a little more optimistic about it, but as it stands, I really don't think there's anything to do with this card right now. I'll say this, though. I will say this. If we get an Elestral in the future that, or it's just a card in general that wants you to destroy your own Elestral, like it's, I don't know, destroy your own Elestral and then do a really good effect, then we can maybe start looking at Hypnopossum, because then the payoff, I think, will be a little more worth it. But currently, as it stands, a 1/1 that can bring itself back when destroyed, specifically, I really don't think does a lot. Ectopossum, I don't think it's too much better. I'm going to give it a 2-star here. I would be a lot more optimistic about this card if it didn't just get outclassed directly by other cards that are actually in this set, right? Because for example, if this card wasn't coming out alongside Cedar Soar, I would maybe think about playing some Lunar in a Frost Self-Mill deck to potentially cast this out. That said, you can just do that with Cedar Soar and not have to play Lunar. If you're looking for a 2-spirit Lunar Elestral that comes back from the graveyard a lot, I think the Phasmacore has a much better set line. Now, granted, the Ectoplasm is when it's sent from the hand or decked to the Underworld and not when destroyed, so there are different conditions. But I think that they also kind of want you to discard this off of the Lunar phases and attempt to maybe ascend into a Posthumous that way. But Lunar Phase Full Moon is a much simpler and much less clunky way of doing that. So, again, Ectoplasm would be cool if it wasn't directly outclassed by so many cards in the same set it came out in. All right, next up we have Toxiri. Toxiri I'm going to give 4 stars. So, Toxiri is a very solid stat line, and more importantly, upon cast, normal or special. That is important. For, I don't know, maybe some minor interactions, but worth noting. You can search for Dense Fog. Dense Fog being a card that I would absolutely rate 5 stars. It is an extremely good card. Sees very heavy sideboard play. And I think, again, like a lot of these preview Lunar cards, the main reason it doesn't see more play already is that there's not a dedicated Lunar deck out there. The Suppressed Elestrals being -2 attack and defense is really just cherry on the top, but it's very nice cherry on the top that effectively makes this a 4/6 when you cast that Dense Fog that you search. So another very good bonus for this card. I don't think you necessarily play this in every single deck that you would play Dense Fog in. I think a lot of the time you will end up citing Dense Fog in non-dedicated Lunar decks, or maybe even splashing it with some other Lunar cards. But I think that this is still a quite good card, and I would definitely consider it for dedicated Lunar decks. Night Venom. Night Venom being the other big payoff for Dense Fog. I'm going to give it 3 stars. This strategy, so here's the thing. The payoff for this strategy is very, very good. Discarding a Dense Fog to target and destroy up to 2 cards, blowing up multiple cards for not paying any spirits at all for that effect is quite good. Like I said, the second effect is like, I would expect to really get that off a lot of the time. And, like, even if you do, not being able to be targeted by Invoke Runes is basically only useful against exactly EQ and Laurels, which are played a lot, to be fair, but are also both at 1. The thing I'm a little skeptical about with this strategy is that there's not really a clean way to necessarily, like, ascend this right off the bat. Although, to be fair, your Toxiri, like I said before, is a well-statted body that gives -2/-2. But now here's another one of my main issues with the Night Venom is that your Toxiri wants you to set and cast your Dense Fog, but this wants you to not set and cast it and instead hold it in your hand. I think that is a little bit awkward and a little bit of a non-synergy there, which I think is another thing that might potentially hold the Night Venom back. All right, next up we have Werepup. Werepup, I'm going to give 4 stars. You definitely play Werepup in any deck that is playing a good amount of Lunar Spirits. And honestly, I think not just even a good amount, I think you play it in any deck that is playing Lunar Spirits, because there is one Lunar Spirit in particular that I think has potential to see play outside of all of the others, outside of that package. And I think if you're playing that one in particular, you would also probably play the Werepup just to be able to search it. There is also something to be said for the second effect. Being able to special send into the Like a Void off the full moon might make for its own solid enough strategy. And speaking of the Like a Void, I'm going to give this one 3 stars. These 2 cards are actually very similar to the last 2 we just looked at, the Toxiri and the Night Venom. So the base form, I think, is definitely good enough to play, even outside of using the second form. Like a Void, I wouldn't play in every single deck necessarily that's playing the Werepup, but that said, I do think this is a decent card to go into. That's a decent gameplay loop, right? The idea being that, you go Werepup for full moon, activate the full moon, put 2 spirits on the Werepup, and then special send it into the Like a Void. Then Like a Void has 4 spirits. It can swing in with piercing and is unaffected by counter runes. This turn bit is a bit rough. That is definitely a bit rough. But at the same time, you know, it is still something that I think is an idea that's worth exploring. All right, next up we have Havoc Cub. Havoc Cub, I'm going to give this card, this might be a little bit of a controversial rating. I'm going to give this card 2 stars. I know a lot of people are pretty up on this card because of its ability. It can't get outed by Eddie. It can't get outed by Eddie. And 4/3 is a pretty decent body. Tsunami, I guess, is another card that's also immune to Mudlet, but the Mudlet couldn't run over it anyway because it has 3 defense. So, I don't know. I will say, though, at the end of the day, I think this is pretty much a vanilla. Like, yeah, the position changing effect is like, it's fine. There's like a handful of relevant cards out there that, you know, it plays well into. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's still just a 4/3/1 spirit, right? Like, even thinking about Eddie, one of the cards that this is, you know, supposed to be really good against, like, even if Eddie can't switch into defense mode and run over it, Eddie could still just crash into it, right? So, I don't know. I would not feel good about like trying to build a board proactively by casting a Havoc Cub. I think you can do better. Pulveror, I'm a little more optimistic about. I'm going to give this one 3 stars because the special ascend effect here, I think it's interesting. It might be a little bit win more at the end of the day, but I think the stat line is very good. 7/4 I think is quite good. And the ability to like surprise start battling for multiple spirits is also quite good. This is also potentially another way in Lunar to cheat out a 3 spirit. Lunar has a lot of ways to do this, but I think there are much better ways. But that said, the Pulveror definitely has use outside of that. Again, the 7/4 body already being quite good. You're probably just going to end up disenchanting the Lunar from like an Artemis or a Temple of the Moon, but I think that not only will people try this card, I think it'll be decent as well. All right, Drakid. Drakid, of course, being a card that we've already seen quite extensive play with, that and Drak King, but I still want to talk about them a little bit here, just in terms of like context with the new set and also, you know, reviewing them, I guess, so to speak, as they've seen play so far. So Drakid and Drak King, I don't necessarily think you have to play in like a Lunar strategy. I think you still probably play them in more of a water-based deck. The Drakid, like I said, I'll give it 3 stars because, I don't know, I kind of wish I could give it 2.5 here because I think it's a little bit, like, I don't know. Even in the Drak King strategy, which I do think is a 3-star deck, you don't always play it. You definitely always don't play a playset. I don't think you ever play a full playset. But you don't even have to always play the Drakid. Drakid is a fine reactive card, but it's also still a little bit situational, right? The first effect reads really good on paper, but in practice, between Astrabbits in defense mode and 2 and 3 Spirit Elestals being more and more common nowadays, it becomes a lot more situational than you might think it would be. So you are actually mainly playing it for the second effect. And then the Drak King, you know, this card I will go ahead and also give 3 stars. We've seen it see a good amount of play in the current meta. I think it's a fine deck. That said, it hasn't taken any tournament tops, and in my experience playing against it, the card is strong. There is no doubt about that, but the strategy is also very telegraphed in a way, right? The Drak King also does get messed over by a lot of cards, not the least of which is Galaxy. Holy, Galaxy just eats this card alive and is seeing play in a lot of decks, not even necessarily just in water right now. So, yeah, if Drak King, like, I don't know, if it were 7/5, I'd be a lot more optimistic about the card. Even for its stat, if it had 8 attack, I think I'd be a lot more optimistic about it, but I think it's still a fine card. All right, next up we have Corvuscull. Corvuscull, I'm going to give it 2 stars because I think people will try this out, but I kind of think this is a 1-star card, right? Because basically the idea is that you foretell and then you can potentially stack a card from your Underworld back on top of your deck, but I don't think that effect is worth, you know, spending an Elestral cast for a fairly mediocre body on. It's definitely not nearly as good as Corvushine, its solar counterpart. I have seen people talk about like messing around with this card and like there's certain, you know, you can stack cards that you mill from your Underworld so that way you can guarantee draw them. So I think people will try it out, but I think this is probably going to end up being a 1-star card when all's said and done. Bandaloon. Bandaloon, I'm going to say the same thing about Volclips and I guess kind of also what I said about Corvuscull just now. I'm going to give Bandaloon 2 stars because I know people are going to try it out, but I think this is a 1-star card. This effect reads crazy at a glance, but when you really stop and think about it, 1, the 3/1 body is just abysmal. It's just not good. 2, this is really, really expensive. If you steal like a PTA or a Gorgon's Gaze, which is like best case scenario, you're like spending 4 and your normal cast on it, which is quite a bit. And 3, I think the biggest issue is that if your opponent does have something like PTA and Gorgon's Gaze, and they really don't want you to have it, they can just chain it. And I think that's a problem, you know, with a lot of the runes you're going to try to take. Now, I will say this doesn't target, which is pretty good. But also, I think we're going to be in a meta where people are going to be afraid to set multiple face down runes. And I think for that reason, they're just going to chain whatever their 1 is, right, when the Bandaloon comes down. Even if it's something like a Tsunami, you could, in theory, just chain the Tsunami right then and there. There is also the prospect of you might take something that you are not able to cast, like a Tsunami if you're on 0 water. So, Bandaloon might read really crazy, but I don't think this card is actually good. Porky Wraith, I am going to actually just rate 1 star. I don't think people want to try this. If you want to play, like, this is a pseudo beater that needs to have like multiple spirits on it in order to be really good. There is much better beaters even within Lunar that you can play, like Spectaris. So, Comalis, I'm gonna give Comalis 3 stars. This is one of the ratings I'm the least sure on, I think, for the entire set. So I did try to see. I don't think there are any spectral cards. I don't think there's any spectral cards pre Moonrise. I did a brief cursory search in like the app, and I didn't see anything. So I should have pointed out which cards were spectral as we were going through them. I went through the list, you know, beforehand, and I think the best target for this is Posthumous or potentially another copy of itself. I think this is the only 1-spirit Lunar Nexuser. So take that with what you will. And as time goes on, there will be more spectral Elestals added, and this card will get better. I'm only giving it a 3-star rating for now, because there's not a ton of things to search off of it that are like worth searching. But I will say that the ability to search a Posthumous is probably going to be very relevant for that deck. So a card that'll see play as probably like a 2 of in the Posthumous deck, I'll give it 3 stars. But again, I think this card will definitely get better with time. And it could already be a 4-star card now. I'm definitely willing to be wrong about that. Cryptoris. I'm going to give Cryptoris 3 stars. So here's how I view Cryptoris after reading its effect a couple of times. This is kind of like Apollo for Lunar. It's just in Elestral instead of a Divine. There are pros and cons to that. Elestrals, of course, by virtue of being able to be battled over, are easier to take out. That said, this can add multiple Lunar Elestrals, potentially. So that is definitely pretty good. The stat line here is not great, which I think is one of the main things that keeps it from being higher than like 3 stars. I wouldn't really bank on trying to foretell a lot in one turn and make this huge, especially because it's only... Wait, is it until the end of the turn? It gets +2 attack for each time you foretold this turn. I assumed when reading this that the stat buff wears off during the end phase. If it doesn't, I think this card actually does have higher prospects. It might even be a 4-star card. Maybe. But if it doesn't, I think it's pretty firmly a 3-star card. So yeah, like I said, I compare this in my head to Apollo. It's just an Elestral instead of a Divine. So however good that ends up being for Lunar, I guess is how good this card will be. Necrolith. This rating might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to rate Necrolith 3 stars. So here's the thing. The stats, fantastic. Absolutely phenomenal. That said, I don't think this card is quite as easy to normal cast as some people think. Because the only card that we've really seen in Lunar that can easily suppress multiple cards is going to be the Dense Fog. Now, Dense Fog, of course, is a very good card that I expect will see play in Lunar. But it's also a counter rune that makes this kind of slow. And your opponent would have to have 2 Elestrals in play for that. So when you think about it, that's a lot of hoops to jump through, right? If your opponent has 2 Elestrals in play If you Dense Fog and suppress both of them, then during your turn, so you have to have already set up the Dense Fog beforehand, then you can normal cast a Necrolith for 2 and pop one of those cards. I do think the effect is quite good to destroy a suppressed Celestial. Like, if this can be normal cast, then yes, this card is absolutely amazing. But again, I think that normal casting this card is more difficult than people think it is. You could also just, like, you know, ascend to this regularly, but you do still have to have a way to suppress stuff if you're going to do that, right? So, I've seen some people say, especially when this card was first revealed, like, best Lith, best Lith. I definitely don't think that. I think it's quite good. I even kind of hesitate to say that because, like, in my Lith video, I put this higher than, like, Verdalith, but I don't know if I actually think that's the case when I think about it a little bit more. That said, I think this card will still definitely see play, and I think it'll still be fine in I'd probably only play it... How do I only play it? I'd probably be most willing to play it in a dedicated Posthumous deck, which I do think will be fine, but even in that deck, I think it's a little bit situational. A little bit situational. Alright, out of the Lunar cards, we're on to Ardbud, and I think this is a 5-star card. This is a very powerful receive effect for Earth. Grabbing Insectoid Elestals is so good. And, I mean, here's the thing. Even outside of Earth, which this can grab Viscerus, which is, like, you know, arguably Earth's best one spirit. You could also grab Specteris. You can maybe even play like an Earth Lunar 5s deck in that regard. But even beyond that, you could play it in the Antitan deck, which I think will be at least somewhat a thing. The ability to ascend this into an Ardvum from your deck is very good, and it's not that hard to fulfill, right? To disenchant this from your insect cards. Oh, and then the other things to consider is just how many good insectoid cards are in this game, right? Like, I could see a world where in Rhinosect, you consider playing this to be able to search Rhiniv. In, in Cyanectar, this is definitely a good alternative potentially to the Rummagem, right? So, since in Cyanectar, I meant in Wasp Ivy for the Cyanectar. You know what I mean. That said, I think Ardbud is just a great card. Earth is already a tier 1 deck. I think this slots pretty well into Earth and also has potential to see play outside of it in numerous other decks. So, I think definitely a 5-star card. For Aridvarum, just had to make sure I said it right there, I'm going to give this one 3 stars. I think that the ability to ascend, again, off the Disenchanting the Insectoid is not that hard to fulfill. I just don't know, like, in an Earth deck, for example, if you'd be willing to play this and Lunar Spirits in general, just to go into the Ardvarum. That said, this is a very good card if you do go into it. Upon cast, it'll search for any insectoid, so that could just straight up grab, like, Rhinosect, for example, or any 2 or 3 spirit insectoid. So worth considering, I guess, in that regard. Also, the Ascend effect is not bad either. I think the idea, of course, a lot of times that you want to blow up your own insectoid, but this can also just definitely eat an opponent's insectoid. It's a very common Elestral type, so definitely not that bad at all. And then the third form, Antitan, I'm going to give this 3 stars. I think that a dedicated Antitan deck outside of Earth Nexus is something that could potentially crop up, right? Again, maybe more of Earth and Lunar even split, and we're looking at playing like Visceruses and Specterises or something like that, right? Which, again, are both very good cards in their own right. The first effect is quite good, of course, and being unaffected by Elestral effects is also not too shabby either. 11-8 is a little small for 3 spirits compared to other 3 spirits, but in terms of stats in general, is a very good spread. So, Antitan, I think, will not only see experimentation, but also will see a decent bit of success as its own dedicated deck there. Clovey, let's see here. So for Clovey, I think Clovey's going to remain a 1-star Elestral. I think Clovey's only a 1-star because Earth is already so stacked in terms of 1 spirits. I could see a world where, like, in Fire, this card would see more play if this card, like, 1-to-1 existed in Fire, but yeah, as it stands, Clovey currently doesn't see any play. I don't think that'll change after the set. Cedar Soar. So Cedar Soar, I am going to give 4 stars. This is Clovey's new Ascension, and obviously a lot more up on this than the Clovey. So I think this card is extremely good for its first effect. Frost Self-Mill is already a thing, so being able to just jam this in that deck and then get a free 2-spirit once you mill it is like so good. The 4/6 is not like the best stat spread for a 2-spirit, but when you're just special casting it, like that's totally fine. Like, I can even see a world where you just jam Cedar Soar and Frost Self-Mill, and you don't even play any Earth. You're just always misenchanting it off of its effect, when you special cast it. The second effect to search a 3-cost Earth or Frost Celestial is, like, it's okay. I really don't think you're going to be using it that often. That'd be kind of surprised if you did, honestly. But yeah, no, I do think that the first effect makes this very much worth looking at. I would be surprised if this saw no play in Frost Self-Mill, which is already a strategy that has topped tournaments before. That good old Morleth deck. Cactibrel, I'm going to give 2 stars. I think this card is actually, like, decently interesting for its first effect, right? The ability to negate counter runes by basically sacrificing it, I think is, again, neat. It's a little bit win more. Like, obviously this isn't a very proactive card. You want to tack this onto a board that's already pretty well established. The second effect, I'm really not factoring in at all. I'm mainly just looking at the first effect here. And I could see a world where maybe this sees some experimentation. But again, it is kind of running that similar problem of, like, there are so many good Earth 1-spirits out there that, like, I don't know that this really has that much of a chance of seeing a lot of play. Next up, we got Cactibrum, the Ascended form of Cactibrel. This one I'm just going to give 1 star. For a 2-spirit, 4/6 is really not that great of a stat spread. Can't be targeted by Invoke runes, is such a whatever protection effect. As I touched on before, it really only helps against EQ and Laurels. And the second effect is like, whatever. It's so whatever. Yeah, I don't think this card's going to see any amount of play. Cinder. I'll give Cinder 2 stars, even though it currently sees, like, no play at all. Like, only because... Okay, here's the reason I'm giving Cinder 2 stars. If you're going to play a mill deck in Elestals, you probably do just have to play Cinder. That said, I don't think mill decks are good at all right now, and I don't think Cinder is a enticing reason to play mill. Nor do I think its new Ascended form Salashade is enticing reason to play mill. In fact, I'm just going to give this card 1 star. I think it's terrible. It can't be special send. There's no way to special send the Cinder into it. You have to randomly add a Lunar to your deck in order to be able to play it. It's a 3/3 for a 2-spirit, which is like, huh? Like, even with the first effect, keeping that in mind, I think that's still really low. This just dies to Eddie. Yeah, I don't like this card at all. I don't think it's good. Bellowbee. I'm gonna give Bellowbee 1 star. I'm very whelmed by this card. You know what? Not even whelmed. I'm underwhelmed by it. Like, the buff effect is so whatever, honestly, and the protection effect is, like, very specific. Not just because it's only counter runes. I think that's actually fine, but the fact that you have to target, like, this has to be in play. You have to target a fire or wind enchanted Elestral, like, during your turn. It's just so weirdly specific. I'm not a fan. I don't think it's good. In Fornax, I'll give 2 stars. I'm, like, very slightly more optimistic about this card. I think the first effect is not bad, certainly. Nor is the second effect. Definitely gives you a good way of making this a solid attacker. And you could even potentially get the buff during your opponent's turn by casting a counter rune. That said, it's fire and wind, which is a really awkward combination, and I don't think this is an enticing enough reason to go into a dedicated fire/wind deck. Torchin, I'm going to give 2 stars, because people are definitely going to try it, and it might even be a 3-star card, but I don't really see it being much higher than that. Like, fire does pretty badly need a way to heal, but I don't think this is it. Because this has to attack in order to heal, it's really only good when attacking into something in defense mode or attacking directly, so it's basically only good when you're ahead. And Healing is something that you want to do a lot of the time when you're behind and not when you're ahead necessarily. So in that regard, I just don't think Torchin pans out. If this had any amount of stats, like this, if it was like even a 2-2, like that'd be so, I'd have much higher prospects for it, but one was just far too small. Schnark, I'm going to give 2 stars because I definitely think people are going to, I know some people actually firsthand who are going to try it out. The search is quite specific, and while there are a decent number of cards that, do fit this bill, mainly Drakking and Tsunami High Tide, I don't think that searching exactly those cards is good enough necessarily. And the body's pretty, like, whatever, 3-3. There is another target you can search that's pretty okay, and that's the Joblin. This one I'll actually give 3 stars because I'm a little more optimistic about it than its pre-form. 8-4 is quite good stat line for a 2 spirit. And also the effect is pretty relevant. Not only does changing mode matter, of course, quite a bit, that effect in general, but water does that a lot, and this lets you draw a card each time that happens. So there are quite a few worlds where you'll just draw multiple cards per turn off of this, right? So I expect this will see a decent bit of play, and even beyond experimentation, I think will be decent. Oistress remains a 1-star card as always ever, just not good. Oistillery, I am going to give 3 stars, however. I think MBT compared this to Locagon. I think it's a pretty apt comparison. It's a defensive body that can kind of get in there with a okay attack line, or okay attack value, rather. And it'll also sometimes destroy cards. Discard any water card is not that big of an ask for, of course, a water deck. And I think discarding to destroy a card is fine, right? Because it's not requiring you to spend any spirits. So I think it'll see some out of experimentation and do decently when it does. Starbit. I really like Starbit, but I'm going to give it 2 stars. I don't think it's really that good. People will try it. I'm going to be one of those people. That said, I think that actually going into Supernova off the Starbit is probably not going to be good enough. The Nexus, the fact that it can Nexus up to 2 water is interesting. If water really needs a Nexuser that can do multiple stuff, then it might use this, but water also just has Poseidon. So I can't really imagine a world where you need this just for Nexusing. The Supernova form of Starbit, I'm going to give 3 stars. I'm definitely more optimistic about this card than the first form. Because it does have applications outside of just being cast off the Starbit. You can grab this off of Foamy. Foamy does bring it out in defense mode, but there's just a lot of game states where it's not hard to either protect this or, like, your opponent just has 1 Elestral and they battle into Foamy. And being able to grab a 7 attack Elestral off of Foamy is a pretty good prospect. You could also potentially cast this from hand off of the Coastalith. Again, I'm going to be trying this, and I think grabbing this off of Foamy in particular might actually be good enough to see, a solid amount of play, but I'm mostly giving this 3 stars because I like it. This probably should just be a 2-star card, but I still think it is very cool, if nothing else. Electrofly. So, as a standalone card, and you'll see why I point this out in a moment. As a standalone card, I'm going to give Electrofly 2 stars. Mostly because I don't think Thunder needs the search that badly to just play this and nothing else in the new set. Like, I don't think you just add 3 Electrofly to your current Thunder Nexus deck. Searching 1 Spirit Thunder Elestrals is quite good, of course, not denying that, but do you want to do it so badly that you use your normal cast on a 1/1 that just pops itself? I don't think that's necessarily the case. However, the Electro Knight, I might be wrong about this, but I'm going to call this a 4-star card. I think the Electro Knight is quite good. Thunder finally has a Nexuser that's not exactly the Larvacell into Phosphocell line. Granted, it requires you to run Lunar, but I actually think that it's worth it because of how good both of its second effects are, right? So when it receives Thunder, you can special cast that Electrofly from your hand or deck. So that's why I specified Electrify is a 2-star card if you play it by itself. Once you're casting it for free from your deck, the prospects of playing that card get a lot better. And especially when after you use that effect, you get to draw a card. So that's Sky Striker Mobilize Engage. That is a straight up search plus draw. And the thing that also makes this cracked is that you can do this 2 times per turn. So the idea being that, like, you ascend your dude into Electronite. That triggers the effect, special cast the Electrify, and then you can, you know, pop it to search and then draw. But you can also Nexus in the same turn, and then the when effect will activate again because it has received another Thunder. So multiple searches plus draws per turn. I think this card is pretty good. I think that it has a high chance of seeing play in Thunder. The 4/6 stat line is a little bit bleh, but for a 2-spirit, but I think the advantage you get off this card is totally worth it. Plus, while Mount Olympus is up, this is just a 5/7, which is much better than a 4/6. So, I think this card is good. I'm willing to be wrong about it, but I think it is quite good. Titano Strike, I'm going to give 3 stars. So Thunderstorm is already a better card than a lot of people might think, and this is really going to pay off for playing it. There are actually dedicated like Thunderstorm strategies with like Arclith, right? That's basically what the Monarch deck is. So this would be a nice addition to that deck. That said, I think the current Thunder Nexus shell with stuff like Jolton and Elechic, those which are all absolutely 5-star cards, I think are just so much better than this, and this probably doesn't see as much play for that reason. But in a world where Thunder Nexus was a little more reined in, I think this card would see a lot more potential experimentation. Magneros, I'm also going to give 3 stars. So this is another Nexuser for Thunder. The thing I'm kind of skeptical about regarding this card is not only its pretty poor stat line, but like the Foretell effect is like so specific to be able to search. You pretty much have to grab exactly Race to the Top or Thunderstorm if you're on a Thunderstorm strategy. So I think if you are on a Thunderstorm strategy, you are probably just playing this. But in a regular Thunder Nexus deck, I don't know if this actually ends up making the cut. Again, mostly just because of how high the card quality in that deck already is right now, right? All right, Winjin. Winjin, I'm going to give 2 stars. It's cute. The ability to ascend into the Tornadian if you guess the foretold card. And of course, there are ways of stacking your deck with stuff like First Light and some of the other cards that we've seen already in this set. But is that worth it to be able to go into a Tornadian? I kind of don't think it is. And as far as like, you know, really, really good competitive decks, and 3/1 is not the most impressive body. So the Tornadian is an 8/2 that's wind and solar. And yeah, it lets you search for... So there are some printings I've seen online that say up to 3 cards. That is a misprint, or like that's not what the final effect is. You do have to search exactly 3. You can't just grab only 1 card and just guaranteed add it to your hand. So in that regard, like the effect is like okay. You're basically expending 1 to get a really good draw because it's 1 of 3 cards that you really want, right? But you don't get to pick the card again, so it's not really a search. That's why I consider it a really good draw. But the 8/2 stat line, I think, is just kind of poor, honestly, for A2 Spirit. Carry On is a 1-star card now, and it will be after the set comes out, because I don't think its Ascended form Carry Off is good at all. I think it's also just a 1-star card, which is a shame because I think it has probably one of the coolest arts of the set, especially its full art is gorgeous, but it's just really expensive. Like, the special cast effect is a non-combo with the carry-on because you can't actually use the expend effect during the battle phase. The expend effect is also really, really expensive, and like, yeah, you can take control of their dudes, but like, what are you gonna do with their dude? Like, you're gonna like, obviously you could just battle into your opponent or like crash potentially, but like, that's really specific to try to crash. You could try to ascend, but that's like a multiple turn setup involving a 2-spirit already, so it's like, I just kind of don't think this card is it. Aviolith, I'm going to give 2 stars. I did call this the worst Lith in my Lith ranking video, and I stand by that point. I think this card is fine. I think it's okay. But As far as the liths go, it's definitely not that great. I think this will kind of act as disincentive to set multiple runes as well, alongside other cards, of course. But of the cards that punish multiple runes setting, I think this is probably the weakest, especially because like your opponent can just chain the counter runes that they have down to the Aviolith and just deny you draws in that regard. So, all right, Snowlit. So this one I might be overestimating a little bit, but I'm going to give Snowlit 5 stars. So the thing is that, like, Frost Self-Mill with, like, the Moreless is already a strategy that has topped tournaments, and the Snowlit is so good for that strategy. This is just mini Morelith. That's exactly what Snowlit is. It's a mini Morelith. It's -2/-2 on the stats, so instead of a 6/4, it's a 4/2, which is 4/2 is still a respectable attacking body for a 1 spirit. It's 1 spirit instead of 2, and then it mills 3 cards from your deck instead of 5. But, like, mini Morlith, mini easier to cast Morlith in a deck, a Morlith deck which is already topping tournaments. I think this elevates the Frost Self-Mill strategy even higher than it already was. And again, it was already in a really good spot. So I'm going to give it 5 stars. For Asprowl, which is the second form, I'm going to give this one 3. Because although I think that it is quite good, I don't think it sees quite as much universal play in Frost as Snowlit. I guess to be fair, you don't play Snowlit in every single Frost deck, but you play it in the vast majority of them. Again, any of them that care about self-milling, which is the majority, I think, of Frost decks. So, the thing is, like, with Asprowl, it's a little specific, right? Because you have to have the Snowlit in play when you mill this in order to be able to special ascend it. I think also expending to mill 4 is fine, but I can see that getting pricey pretty quickly. I think the body is good enough. 7/4 is, I mean, that's Dragon stats. You know, there are good enough things that get over it, but at the same time, it's definitely not too bad. And then the third form for this line is going to be Blizztrix. So for this one, I'm also going to give it 3 stars, because I kind of feel the exact same way about it that I do as Asprowl, right? I guess at least in terms of the first effect. Like, it's kind of specific because you have to exactly have the Asprowl in play when you mill this in order to be able to special ascend, but the payoff is quite good. The third effect there, being able to put back stuff you don't want in your yard that you're not planning on, like, bringing back with, like, a Rise or something like that. So being able to put that back and then destroy a card for, again, no spirits at all is not spending any spirits to activate that effect. I think that's quite good. Okay, Morfrost Scorpio form. So this I might be overestimating this card a little bit, but I'm going to give it 3 stars. I think a lot of people, when they read this, were like, oh, this doesn't make Morfrost, like pure Morfrost, a tier 1 deck. Therefore, this is a bad Morfrost card. I think it's really easy to fall into that mental trap when reading this, but the Morfrost cards have seen play in Frost. Not as a dedicated Morfrost deck, but as more of a little engine. A little engine that could even. And I think this is pretty decent as an engine. So right now, you're using Lycan Form to search 2 copies of Indus Form, right? But you could also use Lycan Form in order to search Scorpio Form and Bat Form. Then you can cast a Scorpio form, pitch to Bat form. Bat form effect can recast that Lycan form that's in your graveyard. And then during the end phase, you can even still destroy the opponent's Celestial if it's still in play. But also, you could just like set an Astrabbit to 0 defense. Like, that's also really good. Yeah, I think this card is better than some people give it credit for. The thing is, I don't know if you actually play this plus Bat form over Indus forms, because Indus form is also quite good, being able to blow up back row when it's destroyed, and then also milling your excess Lycan forms. But as far as Morfrost cards go, I think this is better than a lot of people give it credit for. Cockaray. This one I am going to give 2 stars. So a 4/1 that can't be suppressed is like whatever. You're mainly looking to use this for the second effect. Having to cast First Light to go into Draco Ray, which I think is like fine enough, but as a standalone solar card, no, there are definitely better ones that you can do. So the Draco Ray, I'm going to give 3 stars, because I think people are definitely going to try experimenting with this style of strategy. I will say Fire and Solar, not a bad pair, because Cybermole already plays pretty well with Fire cards, which is kind of funny, but yeah, the idea of special casting or special ascending rather, this off of the cock array is actually it seems decent. It heals upon being entered upon entering play. 7/3 is a fine enough stat line, so yeah, I think it's quite decent. The third form, Dragalis, I'm gonna give 2 stars. I kind of think this is a Cryoling, Cryovern, or not Cryoling, Cryovern, a Cryovern and Cryoscorch situation, where the second form, I think, is good to special ascend into, and you can kind of just leave it at that a lot of the time. But the third form is not horrible. I mean, being able to suppress your opponent's whole board is a pretty decent effect, but I don't think suppressing their board and healing a few solar is good enough payoff for a 3-Spirit Elestral. I think there are just better 3-Spirit Elestrals out there. Armadon. Armadon is going to get a 3-star rating from me. So the Armadon having 6 defense is absolutely worth noting. I believe aside from Moose Station, the water crab, this is the only 1-Spirit Celestial in the game that has the number 6 on it. So I think that's always worth noting. I also think the effect is not bad. If your opponent tries to punish you with Eddy or Mudlet, they will take a burn for it, and you can also just like flip-flop your own Armadon with your own cards in order to burn them, right? So definitely, I think, worth noting in that regard. The Gardon, I am going to end up giving 2 stars, though, because there's not really a way to special ascend into it off the first form, and like, I don't know. It's a fine enough card, I guess. It does let you get like tank up a little bit and then, negate certain effects. But I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I probably should just rate this 1 star. But I think someone out there will try it out. All right, so Luxemare. Had to jump to a YouTube video here, or a paused frame of one, because this is actually missing from the Elestals collection site right now. I should probably email or DM them about that or something. But anyway, Luxemare, I am going to end up giving just 1 star here. Oh, whoops! And of course, I end up going to a different point in the video. There we go. Luxemare, I have to give 1 star because, like, here's the thing. I almost gave it 2 stars because of the 4/5 stat line. But then I thought about Aramare, which has this, like, 4/5 stat line seems crazy on paper, but Aramare is also a 4/5 and just doesn't really see any play unless you're exactly trying to use a second effect. So when I think about it in that regard, Luxemare is pretty much just a 4/5 vanilla, and I don't think a 4/5 vanilla in Solar is quite good enough. I say pretty much a vanilla because I would never expect to resolve this first effect. It's far too gimmicky. We'll see a card that will potentially try to help you do it, but I don't think it's worth playing at all. The Aosdale, I am a little more optimistic about. I'll give this one 2 stars. As far as 2-Spirit Solar Elestrals go, this one's, I think, decent. It's a 6/6. That's pretty good stats. It can foretell 3 and then cheat a 1-Spirit Solar that's foretold. That's a pretty decent effect. But, like, I don't know, is okay stats and an okay effect really enough to, make me want to put this in a Solar deck? I don't know. Not really, honestly, off the top of my head. I don't think, I can't think of a way to slot it in that wouldn't be a little bit awkward. Artemis. Artemis is going to be another one of our 5-star cards from this set. Artemis already has seen play in tournament-topping decks in the sideboard, granted, not in the main deck, but as with a lot of these Lunar cards that I'm giving high ratings that have already been, in the game, I think the main reason it hasn't, seen play is that there hasn't been the ability to play a dedicated Lunar deck yet. So Artemis, I think, is one of the better divines, right? Being able to suppress any card is really, really good because it's not just Elestrals. You could suppress the Stadium and take away buffs. You could suppress another divine, and then they can't use it because that's until the opponent's next end phase, right? And suppressing Elestrals, a lot of the time is like pretty much tantamount to removing them. Like, think about, Demeter and Zeus, right? The two best divine runes in the game right now. Those are so good because they're basically removal. They give stat differentials that let you run over your opponent's Elestrals. Artemis, while she doesn't give a stat differential, the suppression could actually still represent a stat differential if you suppress an effect that's giving a card a buff. You can suppress effects that are on destroy, like a foamy or something. And again, there's so many applications for this card. I think it is very, very good. Of course, it'll definitely see play in the Posthumous deck. It's a central card in that. But even outside of that, I think this will definitely see a fair bit of play. Bow of Artemis, on the other hand, I gotta give this card 1 star. They did make a 1-spirit artifact, and it just kind of doesn't do really much of anything at all. Piercing is like, whatever. It's not worth going out of your way to spend a spirit and a whole card slot in your deck on this. And I don't think Nexusing for the second effect is really that compelling at all. Yeah, it's a pretty not great card. All right, so now we're getting into the lunar phases. So, thinking back again to the Voldusk earlier, right? That'll be part of the dedicated lunar phase deck. And of course, Volclipse wants you to play all 8. So for lunar phase and new moon, I'm going to give this one 4 stars. I think this one is quite good. I think that you could even see this card outside of dedicated lunar phase decks. Invoke speed, targeting an Elestral to suppress it is not bad, honestly. Especially if you're trying to play a Necrolith, for example, then I would definitely play Lunar Phase in a deck with Necrolith in it. Also, the second effect is very, very good for dedicated Lunar Phase decks. I think this card is great. Again, great in the Lunar Phase deck and has slight potential to see play outside of it, too. Waxing Crescent, I am going to give 2 stars. This is a battle trick, which there's not a lot of in Elestrals, so, I counter speed, so that's worth noting. But that said, it costs 2. That's pretty expensive. Don't Poke the Bear, I think, only costs 1, right? And I don't know. This card won't count itself, because as the resolving cards stay in play. So, you already have to have set up, I would say, at least 3 Lunar Spirits in your yard for this to really be worth casting. I kind of want to give this 1 star now. Actually, the more I think about it, I just don't think reads that well. First quarter, I am going to give 2 stars as well. So, I kind of want to give this 3. It is worth noting that this is Jar of Greed, which doesn't exist in Elestrals yet, which is just a counter effect that lets you draw a card. The discard effect is also kind of it's fine. That might come up sometimes, but I don't know. Here's the thing, right? Nog Pot of Greed on an Invoke rune is already not that great because spending 2, even if it's drawing 2, is it's a lot. So I wonder if spending 1 is really worth it to draw 1 because it's such a low... Drawing 1 is so much less, so much lower impact than drawing 2. Yeah, I think this card will see some experimentation, but I just really don't think it's that great. Waxing Gibbous. So this one is also going to get 2 stars from me. It's a decent counter rune, but it's also very specific in terms of, how many combats you're going to be in where changing your own Elestral's position is what you want to be doing. Not that many. The second effect, the protection, not only costs more, but you have to discard a Lunar Phase 2, which is it only protects against card effects. If the second effect protected against battle as well, I'd be a lot more up on this card. But as it stands, I really don't think this card is super great. All right. Lunar Phase Full Moon. I have alluded to this card a couple of times in this set, and this is a little speculative, but I actually think this is a 5-star card. And I think of the Lunar Phases, this one will definitely see play outside of a dedicated Lunar Phase deck. So this is a counter rune, which lets you enchant up to 2 Lunar Spirits from Elestral on your field. And then if it gets discarded, you can foretell 3. But most importantly is that first effect. That is a fantastic way to get, 3 Spirit Lunar Elestrals into play. This card would be, I was going to say a lot better. It'd be just broken if it was an Invoke rune. If you could just, have that set up without having to commit this first. But setting this face down is really not even that much of a commitment, because like if you're gonna go into a 3-spirit Elestral, you already have to play a 1-spirit first, and then you have to ascend into the 3-spirit on the next turn, right? So as far as like cheating 3-spirits, not just from Lunar, but in general, I think this card has some pretty interesting applications. Like, you think about 15s, the deck that cheats out Pen Terror without properly enchanting it. I think this card has a lot of potential in a deck like that. Maybe might even just be better than Poseidon. Keep in mind, of course, that this is also searchable off of the Werepup. In fact, you could just go Werepup, search Lunar Phase, set the Lunar Phase, then alongside, Gorgons, PTA, Shield of Achilles, Tsunami, any of these counter runes that protect your, Werepup. You then can go for the Lunar Phase, and if you're not going into the Leica Void, you can just go into a 3-spirit during the next turn from your hand. So, I think that is already pretty promising, on top of just how good that effect is, period, in general, right? Like, imagine you, like, swing in for battle, and your opponent's kind of like, oh, this attack is so whatever, it's fine. You can chain out the Lunar Phase, and basically you're spending 1 to deal an extra 2 damage right there. And that's, like, the most base use of this card, and I think it's already quite promising. So I have high hopes for Lunar Phase Full Moon. I think that, of course, obviously, it goes without saying, this card is great in a dedicated Lunar Phase deck. But again, even outside of that, I think that there are a lot of situations in which you end up playing this. A lot of decks, too, or rather. But anyway. Lunar Phase Waning Gibbous. So this one I am actually just going to give 1 star. I really just don't think it's good at all. Funnily enough, if it discarded, I think it'd be a lot better, because then it could proc the discard effects of some of the Lunar Phases, but you're basically 2-4ing to add exactly Voldust to your hand, and you're also spending a spirit to do that, and I think that's just bad, personally. Lunar Phase Final Quarter. That's going to be, I think, our last Lunar Phase here. And this one is also going to get a 1 star from me. I don't know why you'd want to send... Oh, well, so the reason you want to send your Lunar Phases from the deck to the Underworld is to go into the Volclips and get that bounce effect off. But I don't think, like I said before, that's really worth it. Even if you manage to set it up, that's really weak payoff. And yeah, I don't think the discard effect is good enough to make this card worth playing here. Like, returning 1 Lunar Spirit from your Underworld to your Spirit deck is so minor. I think both this card's modes are just not that great. And finally, Waning Crescent. This one's actually our last Lunar Phase. And this one I'm going to give 4 stars. I think this is another one of the really, really good ones. This is already mini Ambro for Lunar. It puts back 2 spirits instead of 3, but that's still, I mean, Ambro is a very, very broken card. It's extremely good, so being slightly worse Ambro is like still being in a pretty good spot. And this actually has like one of the best payoff effects for being discarded, because you get to draw then discard. Not only is filtering in general good, but you can discard another Lunar Phase with this, and if it has an effect that activates when discarded, that'll just activate too. So you can potentially chain multiple Lunar Phase effects for free off of this discard effect here. Yeah, Waning Crescent is very, very good. Absolutely, you play 3 of this in dedicated Lunar Phase decks. All right, just a few more cards left to go here, coming in towards the end. Temple of the Moon. I think I just have to give this 3 stars, because, like, I don't know. Stadiums tend to be at their best in, like, a Nexus strategy. Lunar doesn't have too much Nexusing going on, though. That said, playing this for the buff might still just be worth it. You'd probably still just side deck this in a dedicated Lunar deck to out Thunder and other Stadium-based decks. So it's like every other Stadium, I think most Stadiums are 3-star cards. Divine Healing. I'm going to give this 2 stars. I kind of wanted to give it 3. I think this card is really, really cool. That said, it is also pretty narrow in what it does. It's really easy to read this and be like, oh, if you play Divine Runes, it's basically like getting 3 more Ambrose, but it's not that good, because the only way to cast those, spirits off the Divine Rune is going to be with an invoke or a counter, which does make the use case for healing those spirits back a lot more narrow in that regard. So, I think people will try it out. Again, I'm probably going to end up being one of those people, but I don't know. I probably think it just doesn't get there. I just probably think it's not quite good enough. Spoiled Fruit, on the other hand, I do think gets there. I'm going to give this card 5 stars. Now, here's the thing, though. Kind of going to throw an asterisk on this 5 stars. It's a 5-star side deck card. I would not main deck Spoiled Fruit. But when it comes to side decking, I think this card is quite good. Because here's the thing, right? It's never going to be fully dead, because every deck plays 3 Ambrosia. So it's always going to be at least some amount of live. And you think about cards like Dratagua, Nemesail, Catarant, Ash Rabbit. From what I've heard, even if you don't target a spirit with Ash Rabbit, this does actually still work on it. To other stuff like Curibus. And just, again, anything that heals, of which there are quite a few cards, but especially Elestals. I wanted to mention Elestals that heal in particular because of the fact that this negates and destroys. It negates and destroys for one of any spirit. I think this card should have cost 2. If it was gonna cost 1, I think it should have only negated and not destroyed. But yeah, the fact that you can negate and destroy again for such a common type of effect, I think is really, really good. I think this card will see play in a lot of sideboards already, potentially, but especially as time moves forward, because there's only ever going to be more cards that heal spirits to the underworld added, and as more and more of those come out, Spoiled Fruit is only going to get better. So, yeah, this card is definitely worth one keeping an eye on, I think. No Stone Unturned. I'm going to give this one 3 stars, mostly because this one I kind of don't know what to make of it necessarily. So, this searches golems, and golems are quite good because liths. Every single lith in the game is a golem. So, you can spend 2 earth to search any lith, which I don't know if... I mean, not even... I don't know. I know that not every deck that's playing lith is going to go that far out of its way to do it. But there are a few that might. Searching Verdolith, of course, being the Earth one, is a decent prospect. For multiple reasons, actually. Playing this on Earth is a decent prospect. One, because, of course, if you spend 2 and then grab the Verdolith, it becomes a lot easier than play the Verdolith and heal, those Earth spirits back. But also, fun fact, I was looking at a list of Earth Golems, and Moss Station, also or not Earth Golems, Golem Elestrals rather, but Moss Station, also a Golem Elestral? So that is another non-lith good search target for the No Stone Unturned. And it's also in Earth, which is, again, worth noting. Boltuga and its evolved form were also golems. That was another decent one I remembered. I don't know. It's like there's not like a ton of golems. It's mostly the liths, but I think this card will definitely see not only experimentation, but I could see a world where there's Earth builds that actually run this to search Verdolith and Moss Station, potentially. And of course, again, like with any search card, there's going to be more targets for it that will come out in the future. So worth keeping your eye on for that, if nothing else. Tsunami High Tide. I'm going to give this one 3 stars. So I think this is a pretty good Invoke rune. I think this might even have the potential to replace Poseidon in a lot of water decks that are playing it. Because of the ability to enchant spirits to your field, that helps you cheat into the 3 Spirit Elestrals, which again, Poseidon is often doing in water. Also, another way for Lunar to do it here too, which is kind of interesting that Lunar has so many ways to do this. And lest we forget, the first effect here, also highly relevant. I really focused on the second one there, but changing the positions of up to 2 Elestrals definitely not only helps you win combats, but it combos with Joblin if you're playing that as well. And overall, just setting up favorable trades is already quite good. It's on top of being able to, if not just deal more damage with the enchanted spirits, potentially ascend into a 3 spirit there. Magnetic force field. This is 1 star. All right, so Earth has a honestly pretty mediocre sideboard card against Burn now. This card is so highly specific that I think this could have been an Omni Rune, and it'd be a 2-star card then, honestly. But the fact that it's Thunder specifically is like a pretty big ask for a card like this. I wouldn't even sideboard this in Thunder, honestly. I don't think it's worth it. Hurricane. Alright, this was probably the hardest card in the set to rate. I'm going to give it 4 stars. But here's the thing. I don't necessarily even... I kind of want to give it 3. I'm bouncing between 3 and 4 here. I'll stay on 4 because that's where I landed for my notes. But I think there's a lot of worlds where Hurricane doesn't even get to resolve that often. I think that you are honestly mostly... Like, the most impact this card is going to have on the meta is as an existential threat of being one of the main reasons to not set multiple face-down runes moving forward after Moonrise. But as far as how often this card is actually going to, like, resolve? Because here's the thing, you know, I think there's a lot of the time where, realistically, this will only be getting 1 face-down rune, and then this is, like, more expensive Thunderstorm. Also, keep in mind that your opponent could just chain the runes, potentially, if that's applicable. If they have, like, Gorgon's Gaze or Tsunami, they might just do that instead of, like, waiting for a battle. Those are kind of the reasons why I want to give this 3 stars and not 4. But I think I will bump it up from 3 to 4, just for, if nothing else, the psychological impact the existence of this card will have on people deciding how many face downs they want to set. Aurora Borealis. 2-star card. God, if this didn't require a discard, I'd be a lot more up on this card. But it's a counter rune, so it's already really slow. And it requires a discard, which is a pretty hefty cost. The effect is very minor, and for that reason, I don't think this is ultimately worth it. Cutting Offer. 1 star. This is intended to be used with the Luxemare, but not only do I not think that the Luxemare standalone is worth it, I don't think using Cunning Offer... Like, I don't... Like, what am I trying to say here? I don't think even using Cunning Offer on Luxemare is, like, the best. Like, I think it's fine. You get a 6/6, but then, like, your opponent gets a 4/5. And yeah, when it's destroyed, they have to expend 3, but you expended 1 to play this and set it up. So it's a spirit differential of 2 for the most specific combo in the world. Yeah, no, I'm good. And last card, Helios' Slumber. This card I'm going to give 2 stars. It's a counter rune, so it's a little slow, but it's kind of an alternative to First Light. And if nothing else, it lets you get a really good top deck. Like, if your opponent battles over an Elestral, and your best top deck is just another copy of that Elestral, just flip Helios' Slumber. I think it'll see experimentation not for that reason, honestly, but more for, like, specific combo builds. But I don't know how much it'll actually pan out. And that's going to do it. That is every card of Moonrise revealed. So thank you very much if you actually watched the entire review here. We're clocking in at well over an hour. So I'm just going to go ahead and I think wrap it up fairly quickly here. Thanks again for watching. I super duper appreciate you. But for the time being, I think we're just going to go ahead and move on to the end of the video here. If you do have any thoughts, any ratings you agree with, disagree with in particular, definitely leave a comment below. That's always very appreciated. So is subbing. That's like one of the best ways to get the channel to help it grow here. So thank you again very much for your support. But this is Hexlex. I'm going to be signing out now, and I'm also hoping that you have a fantastic day.